Hi, this is the 7th episode in my Minecraft lore series, The Minecraft Timeline, with this episode being about the End Dimension. When the ancient builders went underground to escape the undead, some of them went really deep and settled in a massive cave under a mountain, a thing I went over in my last video. But others, probably a group of builders with less people, created another secure bunker of sorts. This bunker is known as the stronghold. The builders dug out a series of tunnels underground, complete with libraries of knowledge and enchanted books, as well as what seems to be prison cells. They used iron doors to ensure maximum security. No zombies were getting into this fortress. The stronghold was so elaborate that, to a newcomer, it was nothing short of a maze. While the stronghold was designed to protect against zombies and skeletons, its stony walls were particularly weak to a certain pest common underground: silverfish. The walls of the stronghold were infested with the things, unfortunately, and their population would only grow as time went on. They weren't dangerous so long as you weren't swarmed, but they were very annoying and hard to hit. However, the builders didn't work too hard to try and eradicate them, since they likely weren't planning on staying in the stronghold for much longer. As we can see, the stronghold is a cramped area with not too much going on. The most exciting thing is the library. We don't see much that would point towards them turning it into a home. Rather, like the Deep Dark Civilization, this group of players had made plans to move to another dimension to ensure their safety from the undead. Unlike the builders of the ancient city, the builders of the stronghold weren't picky in their placement of this temporary home, just somewhere hidden beneath the surface. That's because the settlement believed they already had the key to another dimension, the end. The hosts that we see in Minecraft Legends, Action, Knowledge, and Foresight are the caretakers of the overworlds. They created the overworlds, or at least helped, using the flames of creation. They also told tales of the Nether, a half-finished dimension created without the assistance of the hosts. In the end, a corrupted dimension that belonged to Ender, another host that isn't explicitly stated to exist, but that I'm pretty convinced does. Go watch my first video for more or check the description. You see, the flames of creation was the first thing to ever exist, and it is the source of all matter, and technically time as well. It created action, a host that represents things happening or starting. Then it created knowledge, a host that represents intelligence and thinking, which is how mobs can exist. Then came Ender, a host that represents nothingness and things coming to end, or ceasing to exist. They're basically a counter to the flames of creation, acting as a source of destruction. Then, of course, there was Foresight, who could lead the rest of the hosts, who could see the possible directions of the future, and who generally had a higher understanding of what was going on. Minecraft is a game all about creating things. That's what so many people play Minecraft for. So if we assume that creation in this world is good, then Ender could kind of be considered evil. And we don't see him do much. He has invaded a bit of the Nether, warping the surrounding fungus. This could point toward him being greedy and wanting to take other dimensions, especially one as plentiful as the overworld, for himself. If Ender ever seemed too evil, the hosts would have torn him apart, likely in some sort of ancient war between the higher-ups. Ender was extremely powerful, making him a threat, but he still couldn't rival three other powerful beings and the Flames of Creation, which is arguably more powerful than the godlike hosts. The reason why I believe Ender was torn apart is because the only things we see of him are the remnants of his body parts, like eyes or a heart. So either he was torn apart, or he just has a more abstract form from the rest of the hosts. Although in this scene, it seems as though there is a corner dedicated to Ender, which he is absent from. I interpreted this as meaning Ender is gone, or in remnants. But anyway, like how the End invaded a bit of the Nether, it also invaded a bit of the overworlds, but only once. And a few ancient people were around and collected the End Stone and other End material. Since the End is so closely related to the Void, and the Void is a bridge between dimensions, as demonstrated by all dimensions having one and the Nether portal sharing its signature colors, Ender was able to easily invade other dimensions. The builders used their limited endstone to hopefully construct a portal to the end, something they heard about from the hosts. If they somehow had it on them, they might have also used bedrock to reinforce the portal frame and strengthen the connection to the void. Bedrock was clearly related to the Black Abyss, maybe just as much as the End. To power it, the builders used spare end material along with a little bit of the flames of creation to make copies of one of Ender's eyes. It would have been a little different, however, from the eyes we craft now, which utilize ender pearls from endermen as its source of the void and blaze powder as its source of the flames. It's really all we can get our hands on. Luckily, the portal activated, and before venturing into the unknown, the builders used silverfish and lava to defend the portal from intruders. The ancient builders who constructed the stronghold would all eventually jump through the portal to the end. But not all of them would go through at once, of course. There would be a select few who would enter first, either the most skilled among them or the most expendable ones. Whatever the case, the first builders to go through didn't return, concerning the ones on the other side. This was because, unlike the Nether portal, the End portal was a one-way trip, which wasn't too bad for their long-term goal of leaving the overworld altogether. But the builders on the other side just thought there was danger. They sent another group in who also didn't return. The overworld builders didn't know how to get the End ones back, so they just had to wait and hope for something good to happen. It was up to the End builders to escape the dimension. Luckily for them, they had some excess bedrock with them from making the End portal. They made the biggest portal they could with the minimal amount of bedrock they had on them. I would assume they used similar methods that they used to power the original portal to power this one. Thankfully, they were able to activate it, and against all odds, they made it back to the overworld. Plus, they spawned right back into their beds, and just before the overworld builders were about to give up. Now with a way to travel to and from the end, the builders were free to explore this new dimension. At this point in the timeline, there were surprisingly few creatures. In this misshapen, dangerous dimension, all that could live was the occasional endermite, a pest not unlike the silverfish, but one that had a unique connection to the void, being able to escape into whatever dimension it wanted to, so long as a connection to and from the void was made, such as when teleporting. And I'll dive into that a little later. Since there weren't many mobs, the ancient builders mainly struggled with the unusual terrain. Without a reliable method of travel, the risk of falling and dying into the infinite abyss of darkness lurked around every corner. For building, the only blocks to choose from were the endstone variants and the blocks that can make using chorus fruit, the only native food source in the end, which also happened to teleport you randomly. This was useful in some cases and dangerous in others. The ancient builders figured out that they could pop these in furnaces and use them in builds to add a splash of purple to their otherwise monotone cities. The shape of these cities are also rather notable. This new dimension marked a fresh start for their civilization. The regular architecture they were accustomed to in the overworld were simply too bland for the end, so they built tall structures that branched out, each branch having their own little home. There's no gravity in Minecraft, or at least minimal gravity in the end. Not sure what the physics is supposed to be like in the lore of the game, so there really wasn't a limit to the builder's creativity. The end cities clearly take heavy inspiration from the local chorus fruit, although I guess there wasn't much else to be inspired by. In those cities, they stored a ton of treasure that they've collected over their time in this world, including, but not limited to, armors and tools with tons of good enchants, gold, iron, emeralds, diamonds, and a unique armor trim. You can also find horse armor and saddles, which suggests they brought horses through the portal, but they're clearly dead now. They also would have wanted another food source other than chorus fruit for safety reasons, so they brought some beetroot to set up farms. Why they chose beetroot of all the possible crops, I have no idea, but they seem to be destroyed now, so it doesn't matter. To complete their cities, they wanted yet another golem to act as a guardian, like they've done before for the Ocean Monument and Nether Fortress. This time, they created a small creature that was basically just a head. It wouldn't be that powerful if the ancient builders hadn't designed it to have levitation powers. Ender had always had some of the most unique powers. At least we can find traces of unique powers in the end, such as teleportation or the aforementioned gravity-defying abilities we see in the shulker. Even though it may not sound very helpful on the surface, the shulker could do a lot with levitation. For one, the builders could give these golems shells made out of refined chorus fruit for extra protection and a bit of camouflage. The shells are held to the core of the shulker also via levitation. Their capsules of levitation power, otherwise known as shulker bullets, could deal decent damage if enough of them hit the target, which wasn't all that uncommon considering that these projectiles could also defy gravity themselves and home in on enemies through a series of straight, rigid movements. The real danger wasn't just the initial damage, though, but the subsequent fall damage after the levitation wore off. Levitation would also come to be used as a quicker way of scaling the tall infrastructure of the end cities. Besides the shulkers, the ancient builders used levitation in other ways. A more prominent example are the end ships that you occasionally find in end cities. These are just like regular boats, except they're made out of end material and can fly, providing an easy, if not a bit overly complicated, method of transporting small groups of builders across the treacherous terrain. At the bow or front of the ship, there's the head of the Ender Dragon. Every end ship has one, meaning that Ender Dragons used to roam the End freely. A dragon, though, would of course be a challenging mob to fight, making slaying it that much more of an accomplishment. If a skilled player ever wanted a trophy, a dragon head would be the way to go. There wasn't much else to do in this barren dimension, but do note that the end probably originally looked something more like the Minecraft Dungeons Echoing Void DLC. Still a bit barren, but not like we see in vanilla. After killing a dragon, not only would they get its head as an ornament, but they could use some of its hide in a secret recipe to craft a pair of wings known as an elytra. At least, I assume it's made of ender dragon hide. After all, it is a prized possession that is also found in end ships. If you find an elytra, you're also guaranteed a dragon head and vice versa, so it would make sense if they shared an origin. Otherwise, it might have come from a phantom, especially considering that their membranes can be used to repair elytra, or some sort of bug, since the definition of elytra is the hardened outer wings of a beetle. But I do still think that it comes from a dragon, considering that it's found exclusively in the end. But I also think phantom membranes had some part in the crafting recipe. The elytra are used as a very fast and easy to use way of getting around the end. It only worked for one player at a time, so the end ships were also pretty ideal in some cases, although probably not as fast. Whether or not they knew that they could use rockets to propel themselves is unclear, since I don't think you can find firework rockets in end city chests. Regardless, the ancient builders were doing pretty well in the end, for now. Eventually, after a long time killing dragons, the species nearly went extinct. The builders wanted to preserve this mob, though. They didn't want this legendary creature to be gone forever, despite the fact that they have historically been killing them for show. They had one remaining dragon that they could save, so they got to work. They set up tall pillars on the main end island, made of pure obsidian from previous attempts at portals. Atop these pillars, the ancients placed end crystals. The gas tears and eyes of Ender used to craft the crystals gave it regenerative properties and a connection to the void, so it would be great at healing the dragon. Because of its connection to the void, they could only be placed on things like obsidian or bedrock. They were extremely fragile, but they exploded when destroyed, so they were hard to take out without a bow and arrow. Their plan to keep the dragon alive worked well. Maybe a bit too well, in fact. When the dragon was brought to the main end island, the portals they used to get from the main island to the outer islands where their cities were was destroyed, as well as the only portal they could use to get back to the overworlds. At first it wasn't that big of a deal. They didn't even really want to go back to the overworlds. That was the whole point of migrating to the end. But as time went on, something changed within the builder population. Unless you're new to Minecraft lore, I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. The Endermen, and maybe Enderlings as well, are like the zombies of the end. If the ancients could respawn, the only way they would have disappeared would be if they turned into something else. The reason the ancients left the overworld was because the undead outbreak was a serious threat. Now, the builders in the end were starting to suffer from a diet mainly consisting of chorus fruit and an environment that was detrimental to the builders' health. Over time, they would start to transform. Their bodies turned black as they began to become one with the void. Their bodies stretched into lankier versions of themselves due to the low gravity and generally odd conditions at the end. They retained a tiny bit of their speech, being able to say things like hey, what's up, and more, but their voice was virtually unrecognizable. They also kept the ability to pick up and place blocks, but lost nearly all of their intelligence. And let's talk about the eye thing. Endermen are passive until you look them in the eyes, and they freak out. This could be jealousy of the superior beings they once were, or it could be an inner urge to infect a builder. What do I mean? Well, the Endermen really hate Endermites, and many theorize this is because the Endermites are what really infected the builders. Somehow they got into the builders' food supply. Endermen attack Endermites because the ancient builders despise them for what happened to their species, and when they attack us, it's the Endermites' instincts that kick in. After all, for so long they've thrived off of feeding on the builders' nutrients, as parasites do. Luckily, if you stare into their eyes, the Endermen can fight the Endermite's urges and try to hold themselves back to protect you, but only for so long. The endermites did grant the builders warping powers, though. Endermen are most well known for their iconic teleportation abilities. You can even gain these powers too if you use an ender pearl, something dropped by endermen. Real-life pearls are made from mollusks, coating of parasite and layers of nacre, which is just some material. In this case, the enderman is the mollusk and the endermite is the parasite. If the endermite was stuck on a pearl, it couldn't control the enderman. So my theory is that more than one endermite can infect a builder, explaining how looting can get you so many pearls. The endermites occasionally appear after an ender pearl is used. But this actually doesn't make sense, since the parasite dies when it is cut off from the host's body. I know Minecraft is obviously different from real life, but it's still odd that endermites could just be totally fine after a pearl is destroyed. But again, not completely out of the picture. Before the ancients turned into endermen, they did utilize teleportation quite a bit. They used more bedrock to link the main end island to the outer ones for much easier transportation. Shulkers also had this ability built in, making them a bit harder for intruders to deal with. Teleportation can also be found naturally in chorus fruit, obviously, or even dragon eggs as a defense mechanism. And this doesn't really have to do with teleportation, but I want to bring up another form of magic we see in the end. Ender chests. Crafted from an Eye of Ender and obsidian, two items that are extremely closely related to the void, you can access a part of the void linked to your soul, and you can take items in and out of that area, acting as an interdimensional chest only you can access. The existence of an in-between dimension like the void could suggest that it could be the home of the endermite. A potential theory could be that whenever you use an ender pearl, you temporarily travel through that dimension, not experiencing time of course, ending up somewhere else. That action of creating a connection to the void may give an endermite an opportunity to escape the void and find a target in another dimension. There's not a lot of evidence to substantiate this theory, but it was just on my mind. Anyway, now that the builders were gradually turning into endermen, they wanted to escape this new threat, but couldn't since the dragon they once wanted to keep alive destroyed the portal, being a powerful mob created by the host of destruction himself. And now, as their physical and mental strength that made them so successful in this world was on the decline, they no longer had the capabilities to take out the Ender Dragon themselves. They were officially trapped in the end. Although there were a few select Endermen that had the interesting ability of warping not just to another location, but to a different dimension entirely. For example, you can also find Endermen in the Warped Forest in the Nether. Like I've mentioned before, the Warped Forest is related to the End. You can also find them occasionally warping to the overworld during the night, which is dark like the void, I guess. To this day, the Endermen tell the player to look for the Eye, as they desperately want you to kill the Ender Dragon and free the Enderman. In summary, Ender, the host of destruction, was able to invade the overworld due to having a close link to the void, or bridge between worlds. The builders stumbled upon a bit of end material and used it to go to a new dimension in order to escape the undead. There, they incorporated the End's unique gravity and warping properties in some of their builds. The builders also slayed dragons until there was only one left, so they preserved it using end crystals, but inadvertently locked themselves out of their overworlds. And as endermites from the void got into the builders' food source, they were trapped in the end as they slowly decayed and turned into endermen. Which wraps up yet another video. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next video where we go back to the surface for a recap of the war against the Nether.